Tyler Bond found himself increasingly resentful toward the travel demands of his job. To him, these trips felt like an unnecessary evil, a burden that he loathed. They not only disrupted his work-life balance, but also strained his marriage. Airports, in particular, disgusted him. They were crowded places filled with harried passengers waiting to be herded through security, just like cattle, all eager to reach their destinations. He often wondered if he should simply accept the realities of his career. After all, he was well compensated for enduring such experiences. Reflecting on the past, Tyler recalled how traveling 10 years ago was an ordeal. It began with lengthy lines for check-in, followed by more lines for security, and then yet another line for boarding the plane. Once on board, he would have to stand in line again, waiting impatiently as the passengers ahead of him struggled to stow their luggage in the overhead compartments, all while he remained in the cramped space of the aisle. He vividly remembered the frustration of shuffling forward inch by inch, watching the clock tick down as the takeoff time approached. Now, he had learned the ins and outs of air travel. He no longer needed to check in his luggage, thanks to his status as an experienced traveler. With TSA PreCheck, he enjoyed significantly reduced wait times at security checkpoints across most airports. His years of monthly cross-country travel, complemented by shorter trips, had elevated his standing with his preferred airline. This meant he could board the plane after first-class passengers, avoiding the chaos of the back of the aircraft. He reveled in the little luxuries, such as having a seat with extra legroom and being one of the first to find space for his carry-on bag in the overhead bins. Additionally, his credit card granted him access to airline lounges, which provided a much more pleasant environment compared to the bustling terminals, like the one at Miami Airport, where he often sought refuge from the noise and chaos. Despite these improvements, he still harbored a deep dislike for the entire travel process. However, today in the lounge, something unexpected occurred. He found himself engaged in conversation with Veronica, an attractive woman in her mid-40s who looked a few years younger than him. She wore a stylish ruffled dress that featured a deep neckline, partially obscured by a casual cardigan that framed her figure. Their chat revolved around her recent travels, and as their conversation progressed, she gradually allowed her cardigan to slip off her shoulders, revealing more skin. Tyler felt a thrill run through him as he took in her confidence and poise. As they spoke, Tyler noticed the ease of their interaction. Normally reserved, he found himself opening up more than he anticipated, sharing his own travel anecdotes and experiences from his time in the service. He told her about the challenges and triumphs he faced over the years, reliving the excitement of adventure that once filled his life. At the end of their exchange, Veronica handed him her business card. He stole a quick glance at it, eager to keep his gaze on her, only to discover they both hailed from Denver. This revelation prompted a few more minutes of engaging conversation before she mentioned she had one more stop to make before returning home. Perhaps it was for the best, he mused, as they eventually parted ways, each heading to their respective gates. As he walked away, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that Veronica might have been flirting with him. The possibility lingered in his mind, yet he regretted not recognizing the signs during their interaction. After decades of marriage, his intuition about such matters had dulled. Despite the momentary thrill of flirting, he reminded himself that he had been entirely faithful throughout his 26-year marriage and had no intention of changing that. The guilt of even entertaining such thoughts began to creep in as he realized how easy it was to forget the emotional commitments he had made long ago. As he settled into his spacious economy plus seat for the flight home, a sense of contentment washed over him. The pleasant conversation with Veronica had lifted his spirits, particularly because he was returning with good news, a successful trip that would lead to an additional bonus next quarter. However, just as he was about to switch his phone to airplane mode, it rang. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the screen, but ultimately chose to ignore it when he saw that it was his wife, Rebecca. It was quite early in Denver for her to be awake, let alone calling him. He speculated whether it was an important matter, but decided that whatever she needed could wait. Had it been one of his kids, he would have answered without hesitation. He recognized that the travel commitments he had taken on a decade ago, while limited, had indeed put a strain on their relationship, leading to unnecessary arguments. Although he was rarely away for more than 6 nights a month, it seemed to be too much for both of them. He wished Rebecca could have been more understanding when he first discussed the new position, with its accompanying salary increase and bonuses. Back then, she had practically pushed him out the door, eagerly welcoming him back with open arms and legs when he returned. Yet now, despite his efforts to treat her to more wine and dinner dates and to spend quality time together, she had grown distant. Tyler's boss had recently approached him with an offer for a new position that would require even more travel, which would lead to greater financial rewards. He hadn't mentioned this opportunity to Rebecca. He felt it wouldn't serve any good purpose and might only exacerbate their already strained relationship. The whole situation saddened him. He thought about his children, who were the true light of his life, and the pride he felt for them. His daughter, Jamie, had just started pharmacy school in the fall, while his son, Mike, was attending summer school to get a head start on his engineering degree, just as Tyler had. Both parents beamed with pride over their children's accomplishments, each milestone representing years of hard work and dedication. However, he missed being present for their milestones and cherished moments. He longed for the times when they would all be together. He guessed Rebecca felt similarly, as her recent demeanor had suggested sadness. Despite the challenges they faced as a couple, they had managed to raise 2 exceptional children, smart, cheerful, hardworking, selfless, and blessed with a sense of humor. Over the years, they had experienced many joys together as a family, and Tyler wished he could see them more often. The thought of missed opportunities haunted him as he looked out the airplane window, feeling a mix of gratitude and regret. As the plane began its ascent, he took a deep breath, wishing for clarity amidst the chaos of his thoughts. He realized that the complexities of his life, the responsibilities, the desires, and the relationships were all interwoven. He wanted to find a way to bridge the gap between his professional life and his family, to reconnect with Rebecca and nurture their marriage, while still embracing the rewarding aspects of his career. With that resolve, he settled back in his seat, hoping that when he returned home, he could find the right words to start the conversation that had been so long overdue. Often, as Tyler looked out at the expansive view from their large family home, he found himself contemplating the idea of downsizing. Their children, now adults with homes of their own nearby, had left behind the spacious house, which felt emptier each day. He envisioned a more manageable living situation, one that would alleviate the upkeep and maintenance that the large property demanded. However, whenever he brought up the subject of moving to Rebecca, his wife, she would immediately shut him down. Rebecca's commitment to her work as a financial manager at the hospital was just one aspect of her life. She was also deeply involved in several charity boards in their community. She loved the image that their large home projected, not just to their neighbors, but to herself and the world. The slight additional effort required to maintain the house and yard compared to a smaller home felt like a necessary sacrifice for Rebecca's social standing. For Tyler, the struggle between practicality and perception created a tension that simmered beneath the surface. The flight home was tedious, as it often was, and Tyler felt the weariness of travel settle into his bones. He wasn't in the mood to watch a movie, and sleep had eluded him throughout the journey, so he decided to close his eyes for a few minutes. To his surprise, he drifted off and was jolted awake by the sound of the plane's landing gear engaging with the runway. He checked the time, astonished to discover that he had slept through almost the entire flight. Upon turning his phone back on, he was overwhelmed by a barrage of notifications, voicemails and messages from friends and family, all signaling that something significant had occurred while he was in the air. His heart raced as he called his daughter Jamie. "Oh my God, Dad. Thank God you called." Her voice was shaky, and he could sense an underlying panic. "What's going on? Everyone tried to reach me, but no one told me anything. Jamie, I need you to tell me what's happening. I'm on my way home. Just come by my place." "It's on the way," he urged, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mike will be here too," she added, but her tone was still fraught with worry. "Jamie, You can't leave me hanging like this. Are you and your brother okay? Is your mom all right? Has anyone been hurt? I'm sorry, Daddy. It's a big mess. No one's hurt. Well, none of our loved ones. I'll explain everything when we see each other. What the hell is going on? Tyler thought, frustration and fear mounting. He rushed from Denver International Airport to Jamie's house near the university, making the trip in record time. When he knocked on the door, Jamie opened it, her eyes red-rimmed and glistening with tears. The moment he stepped inside, he noticed his son Mike sitting silently in a chair, his demeanor solemn and grave. What happened? Tyler asked, urgency lacing his voice. Daddy, we're so sorry, Jamie said, her voice quivering as she fought back tears. It's a huge mess. Mike leaned forward, trying to offer some clarity. It's like a big bazaar, Dad. It spiraled out of control. Tell me what happened, Tyler urged, his heart racing with anxiety. Jamie hesitated, glancing at Mike for reassurance before continuing. We didn't want any of this to happen. It all started about a month ago, when you were on your last trip to Boston. I was going to visit Mom during lunch, and as I approached the house, I saw a Tesla pulling into the garage. It was strange because I didn't recognize the car, and I could see the lights on in the house. I noticed shadows moving around inside, so I figured someone was in the garage. I called Mom on her mobile, but she didn't answer. I waited a few more minutes and tried calling her again. When she finally picked up, she claimed she was still at work and would talk to me later. I suspected she was lying, so I hung up and kept watching the house. After a brief silence, Jamie pressed on. Eventually, I moved my car out of sight and snuck up to peek through the garage window. Mom's car was there, along with the Tesla, and I was furious. I called Mike and told him what I had seen because I wanted to know who was with Mom. I spent the entire first day waiting for the Tesla to leave. When it finally did, Mike followed it to a big office building in Cherry Creek. He went in a few minutes later and asked the security guard if he recognized the man who had just entered. The guard gave Mike the man's name, and he called me afterward. We were both confused about what to do next. The next morning I called Mom, upset that she hadn't answered my earlier call, and I've been cold towards her ever since. During your last trip we kept watching, and the same thing happened again, Mike added, frustration evident in his voice. So, we decided to take action. I was there when you checked the smoke detectors a few weeks ago, and when I saw the detector in the garage, I thought of an idea. It seemed funny at the time, but I guess it's not funny anymore. We were afraid to tell you because we knew you would want to catch them in the act. We didn't want you to end up hurting anyone, accidentally or intentionally, and risk going to jail. Jamie nodded, her expression serious. We wanted to find a way to unsettle them and embarrass them. I suggested to Mike that we sneak into the garage around midnight and create one of those unexpected sparks that electric cars sometimes emit. We thought we could generate enough smoke to trigger the alarm. Since the smoke detectors were functioning properly, I assumed nothing serious would happen, just the fire department showing up. But I guess you didn't know there was a heat detector in the garage, not just a smoke detector. Tyler shook his head, disbelief washing over him. Oh crap, that's why the alarm took so long to go off, Mike realized, looking alarmed. But that wasn't all, Jamie interjected, her voice trembling slightly. We thought the fire department's arrival would be embarrassing, but that wasn't enough to stop us. I took it a step further. Tyler stared at them, the implications of their actions sinking in like a heavy weight. So, my marriage has literally gone up in flames. Is our house intact? He asked, dread creeping into his voice. For the most part, Jamie replied hesitantly, her eyes darting away. Tyler's stomach dropped as he recalled visiting the house after Rebecca left for work on both occasions. He had noticed one of her Magnum wine bottles in the trash. I know she likes to keep her bottles chilled most of the time, so it seemed like a perfect opportunity to exacerbate their embarrassment, he admitted, anger and disappointment mixing within him. These days, it's very easy to order Viagra or its equivalents online, so I got some. I'm studying to be a pharmacist, and with my chemistry background, it wasn't hard to turn the pills into a liquid. Tell me you didn't actually do that, Tyler said, his voice rising with alarm. I'm afraid I did, Jamie confessed, her voice trembling. Yesterday afternoon, I snuck into the house, checked the wine fridge, and saw that Mom had already opened her Magnum bottle. I sealed it back up and poured in my mixture, stirring it and making sure there were no traces left behind. We thought that when the fire brigade arrived, they'd have to rush out of the house, and he wouldn't be able to hide his size, exposing her and her lover in front of all the neighbors. It was my turn to intervene, Mike said, his tone grave. Just before midnight, I crawled through the garage window, which I had opened beforehand. It took some time, but using the car's charging port and some tools, I managed to create an arc that made the metal around that area heat up. I don't know if the car was faulty or something, but suddenly there was a shower of sparks. I thought it would trigger the smoke alarm, or at least I hoped so, and I got out of there as quickly as I could. Apparently, after I left, the battery caught fire. Fire. I think that's what happened. Before the firefighters could even arrive on the scene, both his car and Mom's car were engulfed in flames. The alarm inside the house was blaring furiously, shrieking so loudly that the entire neighborhood could hear it echoing through the streets. Jamie spoke up. You know how Mom gets when she's upset. It's like her brain just shuts off. That's when the story took an unexpected turn. One that was perhaps even more captivating than discovering my wife's infidelity or witnessing my home catch fire. Jamie continued. We told you the house didn't burn down. Great. Just great. Earlier this morning, I had a brief conversation with Mom. She described how she leaped out of bed when the alarm went off, her heart racing with panic. She shook Eric, her lover, but he wouldn't wake up. It dawned on her that he had drunk heavily the night before, and in her distress, she feared he might be dead. The thought overwhelmed her and sent her spiraling into a state of panic. In her frantic rush, she picked up the home phone, dialing 911, her voice shrill as she screamed, "Fire! Call an ambulance!" Then, in a moment of sheer desperation, she grabbed Eric by the ankles and began dragging him from the bedroom toward the exit. In her mind, the urgency of saving him overshadowed the fact that they were both completely naked. Realizing she couldn't carry him down the stairs, she resorted to dragging him, oblivious to the absurdity of the situation. At that moment, she clearly wasn't thinking straight. Eric was sprawled face down, and I remembered the nail at the entrance to the bedroom that had popped up just enough to snag one of my socks during a previous visit. Apparently, it hadn't been hammered down properly, or perhaps it had popped back up again. As Mom dragged Eric, his body caught the nail. This is where the Viagra he had consumed earlier with the wine comes into play. Not only did the carpet nail slice into his groin, but the awkward position he was in only added to the injury. In the dim light of the house, the extent of his wounds remained hidden from her as she continued to pull him down the stairs. Bump, 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 with each jarring movement. I almost felt pity for the guy. He had sustained a long gash, bleeding profusely from his groin, and the friction from the carpet had left him with painful abrasions that ran from his groin up to his face. When he fell off the last step onto the kitchen floor, the impact must have burst open his nose. Wham! The sensation of being dragged across the tiled floor toward the front door couldn't have been pleasant for him, especially when his head smacked against the concrete porch, then rolled down the steps onto the sidewalk. Bump, bump, wham. He ended up with road rash and a nasty wound on his face. Tyler had taken over the storytelling by now. The home alarm must have woken up the neighbors, as a crowd had gathered outside to witness the bizarre scene of Mom dragging her lover, both completely naked, out of the front door. Timothy, from across the street, had even recorded the entire spectacle on his phone and sent it to me. Here, take a look. Tyler couldn't believe his eyes as he watched the video on his phone, which clearly showed Rebecca backing out of the house, naked, while Eric's head bounced off the concrete as she pulled him along. It was as if her adrenaline had kicked in, giving her a strength he never knew she had. The ambulance and fire department arrived moments later. Tyler observed as the emergency crews rushed into the house, quickly working to open the garage door and spraying everything inside with hoses. The paramedics approached Mom, throwing an emergency blanket around her to provide some semblance of modesty. Meanwhile, they rolled Eric over, still unconscious, and to add to the absurdity of the situation, his bleeding member was on full display for everyone to see, illustrating just how chaotic the night had been. Tyler felt a strange sense of satisfaction, thinking he was better off compared to her lover. Mike chimed in with more details, explaining that Eric's electric car was equipped with a device that sent alerts to his home phone when something strange occurred. Apparently, Eric's wife, Francine, received a notification that her husband's car was at someone's house instead of the airport, prompting her to rush over to investigate. As Tyler continued to watch, he noted that the paramedics were unable to revive Eric. He was alive but unresponsive. Just as they were preparing to strap him onto a stretcher, Francine stormed in, flipping it over and causing Eric to tumble face first onto the sidewalk. The new cut on his head would undoubtedly require stitches. Tyler couldn't recall ever witnessing anyone so furious. Francine lunged at Eric, landing several solid punches to his groin before the paramedics could pull her away. Even as they loaded him back onto the stretcher, his injury now appeared crooked. Definitely not a good sign. Tyler couldn't help but wonder if Eric would regain consciousness after all this. Rebecca stood in horror as at least a dozen neighbors looked on, witnessing this tragic comedy unfold. In a fit of rage, Francine charged at Rebecca. Instead of striking her, she yanked away the blanket, leaving Rebecca exposed once again until another blanket was finally found. Tyler felt a pang of regret at the sight of his wife naked on the front lawn. He thought, "Damn, I'm going to miss those breasts." The neighbors, however, were certainly not shy about taking in the full view, including her grooming habits, which were now no longer a private matter. When the police arrived, the flames were mostly under control, although Eric's car was still sparking and smoldering. Francine was practically frothing at the mouth, yelling at the police to arrest Rebecca. On what charge, no one could determine. An officer led Rebecca, clearly shaken, to the back of a patrol car to keep her away from Francine and the crowd. Jamie commented that they knew Eric was married to Francine, but had no idea she was the daughter of the district attorney. With her connections, she had enough influence to have Mom taken to the station and placed in an interrogation room for the night, wrapped only in that emergency blanket. They released her around 6 a.m., and she tried to call me, but I didn't answer. Some people say that God isn't merciful. The situation escalated further because, since Eric hadn't regained consciousness right away, they performed a toxicology report. The only unusual finding was trace amounts of Viagra. When Francine learned this, she erupted in fury, insisting that Eric had a bad heart and would never take something like that. At least, that was her claim. The medics said it was fortunate the fire had occurred, as it allowed them to transport him to the hospital quickly enough to prevent him from slipping into a coma. Otherwise, the outcome could have been dire. Tyler, skeptical, asked, "Even worse?" Mike intervened, explaining that the police had taken Mom back to the interrogation room. This morning, officers arrived at our house to collect evidence, but the firefighters had accidentally knocked over the bottles and glasses during the blaze, shattering them with the water and causing significant destruction. With no uncontaminated evidence left, the only thing the police discovered was a bloody trail leading down the steps and out the door. I suspected they were grilling Mom in that interrogation room, but everyone assumed Eric was responsible for taking the Viagra, although there was no concrete evidence. Given the circumstances, I doubted they would hold Mom for long. Plus, they managed to pull the Tesla out of the garage that morning, but the incident was all over the news, and it wasn't pretty. Tyler asked, "Where is your mother now?" Jamie replied, "She's still at the police station. They said they'd call us when we can come get her." "I'm so sorry, Dad. We should have just told you instead of trying to get back at her. We were so angry, and all it did was make a bad situation worse." While his kids looked apprehensive, a smile began to spread slowly across Tyler's face. He stood up and said, "I appreciate what you guys tried to do. It means a lot to me. Honestly, I don't think you made things worse, considering all the circumstances. I think it turned out pretty well. I'm going home now. Your mother will need you both. I'll let you decide who will pick her up. It won't be me." They nodded in understanding. On his way home, Tyler stopped by the bank and transferred half of their accounts into a new account in his name only, planning to take care of the remaining finances later. He swung by the local market to grab some garbage bags for his clothes, knowing they would all need to go to the dry cleaners since the house smelled like smoke. As he approached the house, he didn't focus much on the fire damage. Instead, the bloody trail across the porch and down the steps caught his eye, causing him to chuckle. Upon entering the front door, which was closed but not locked, the bloody trail continued up the steps, prompting another chuckle. The kitchen looked like a war zone. Ignoring the blood, he headed to the bedroom and began packing his clothes into bags for the dry cleaner. His insurance company would cover the expenses. He noticed the bed was unmade, and the sight momentarily saddened him. But only for a moment. He knew what he had to do. Divorcing Rebecca was the obvious first step, followed by separating finances, finding an apartment and taking